Welcome to Oklahoma City University via webinar. My name is Martha Berger, and I'm the president of OCU, and we are so thrilled to have you with us. The turnout is absolutely wonderful. I want to give my special thanks to the Neustadt family for this gift of endowed lectureship that they've made to the Wimberley School of Religion. Walter and Dolores Neustadt of Ardmore, Oklahoma, established the lecture series in 1983 to help us strengthen our understanding of the great contributions of the Judaic religious tradition to Western civilization and thought. Scholars are invited to campus to speak on informative themes in the area of Hebrew scripture, Judaic thought, and Jewish ethics and art. Thank you once again for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Lisa Wolf.
Thank you, President Berger. I'm Dr. Lisa Wolf, professor of Hebrew Bible here at the Wimberley School of Religion at Oklahoma City University. And tonight I'm so pleased to welcome our 2021 Neustadt lecturer, Dr. Alvin H. Rosenfeld. He is professor of English and Jewish Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. He has taught at Indiana University since 1968. He holds the Irving M. Glazer Chair in Jewish Studies and is director of the university's Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism. He founded Indiana University's well-regarded Bourne's Jewish Studies program and served as its director for 30 years. Professor Rosenfeld has served as an editorial board member of various scholarly journals, including Holocaust and Genocide Studies and Anti-Semitism Studies, as well as having been a board member and scholarly consultant to various Jewish institutions and organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, and the Lilly Endowment, among others. Some of his publications include the 2013 edited volume, Resurgent Anti-Semitism, Global Perspectives, and Deciphering the New Anti-Semitism from 2015. He is also the editor of a series of books on Jewish literature and culture published by Indiana University Press, as well as editor of IUP's book series, Studies in Anti-Semitism. Coming in November of this year will be his edited collection entitled Contending with Anti-Semitism in a Rapidly Changing Political Climate. For these and all of Dr. Rosenfeld's other titles with Indiana University Press, the publishing house has extended an offer of 30% off to all webinar participants. Just use the discount code Rosenfeld, which I will also provide to you in the chat feature later. Dr. Rosenfeld has been honored with Indiana University's Distinguished Service Award, Provost's Medal, and President's Medal, which is Indiana University's highest award in recognition of scholarly accomplishment, service, and leadership. Welcome, Dr. Rosenfeld, our 2021 Neustadt lecturer. We are honored to have you with us.
Thanks to Dr. Wolf, President Berger, for this invitation. When I first received it, I had hoped to come out to Oklahoma. I've been there once. I was looking forward to a return visit. Then something I and all of you never expected to happen has happened, namely the pandemic. So I'm speaking to you from Bloomington, Indiana, thanks to the miracle of Zoom. It has some disadvantages. It also has some advantages. We have lots of people with us tonight who otherwise in bad weather might not have been able to join. So I'm honored to continue this distinguished lecture series. And I hope that my talk this evening will be meaningful. Given the subject matter, it's both timely and a bit on the heavy side. So if I don't crack any jokes, you'll forgive me. The subject just doesn't lend itself to humor. What it does lend itself to, though, is serious thought and discussion. And I truly look forward to the question and answer period once I finish with my talk and engaging with any and all of you in talking about the issues I'm going to put before you. Nazism was defeated, we know, in World War II. Anti-Semitism was not. Relatively dormant in recent decades, Jew hatred has revived energetically since the turn of the millennium, and is once again a threatening presence among us. Until recently, most American Jews have felt generally immune to it. That is no longer so. For multiple reasons, Jews in today's America face a level of hostility that most have never experienced before. It set their nerves on edge and forced them to think anew about the security of their personal and community lives today and threats they may face tomorrow. Some of these threats are physical and involve an alarming increase in violence against Jews and Jewish institutions. Others are ideological and political in nature and call into question the patriotism and loyalties of American Jews. Taken together, they present a number of serious challenges. For this evening's lecture, I'm going to focus on the first of these, namely physical assaults motivated by anti-Jewish passions, but I'll be glad to address aspects of political anti-Semitism in the question and answer period, if you wish. Before citing specific instances of such animosity, it's important that we reach a common understanding of what anti-Semitism is and how it's made manifest in word and in deed. In its simplest terms, anti-Semitism might be thought of as hostility to Jews based on an irrational and exaggerated fear of Jews, resentment of Jews, suspicion of Jews, distrust of Jews, hatred of Jews, etc. It draws on a large and by now familiar repertoire of anti-Jewish stereotypes that dates back over many centuries and typically condemns Jews as clannish, exploitative, money-hungry, stingy, out for themselves, cheating, conniving, and conspiratorial. And what I've just put before you is the short list. The language in which these accusations is made varies from time to time, but the fundamental indictment remains the same. The Jews are guilty. Guilty of what, you might wonder? And the answer is everything allegedly morally reprehensible, including acts of ritual murder, political corruption, financial crookedness, sexual depravity, and the spreading of disease. Once these and other stereotypical images of the sinister Jew take hold and become normalized, they are hard to dislodge. If left unchecked, they can cause great harm. Such harm has been occurring with alarming frequency in European countries over the last 2 decades. It's now taking place in this country as well. Consider the following. In November of last year, the FBI released its annual report on hate crimes in America during 2019. Among crimes based on religious bias, 60.2% of all such acts targeted Jews, this despite the fact that Jews make up only about 2% of the country's population, and yet over 60% of hate crimes based on religious bias targeted Jews. A little before that, in May of 2020, the Anti-Defamation League released its annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. It reported over 2,000 acts of harassment, vandalism, and assault against Jews, the highest number in any year since 1979, when the organization first began publishing such information. inasmuch as many incidents are never publicly disclosed. The actual number of hostile acts against Jews and Jewish institutions now taking place each year in our country is likely a good deal higher. As I will soon describe to you, the most brutal of these actions have been lethal, taking the lives of Jews in the United States. Others have targeted synagogues, Jewish schools, homes, shops, community centers, and cemeteries. Many are carried out at the street level and involve acts of physical and verbal assault against individual Jews. At numerous schools, colleges, and universities, Jewish students have been harassed and Jewish property defaced. And hate speech against Jews and others proliferates on social media platforms on a daily basis. What do these findings tell us? At a minimum, that anti-Semitism is a growing fact of life in this country as well as abroad, and it needs to be taken seriously. Here are some examples. On October the 27th, 2018, Robert Bowers, previously unknown, stormed into Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue and shot 17 people who had gathered for Sabbath prayers. Guns blazingly, he shouted, "All Jews must die," as he carried out his killing spree. 11 people, most of them elderly, were murdered in the synagogue. It was the deadliest attack on Jews in American history. Exactly 6 months later to the day, on April the 27th, 2019, John Earnest, also previously unknown, followed Robert Bowers' murderous example and entered a synagogue in Poway, California, near San Diego, with a semi-automatic rifle. Shouting, "Jews are ruining the world," those are his words, he killed one person and wounded 3 others, including the rabbi. After the shooting, he declared, and I quote his words, "I feel no remorse. I only wish I had killed more. I'm honored to be the one to send these vile anti-humans into the pit of fire where they shall remain for eternity." The list continues. On December the 10th, 2019, 2 more people no one had ever heard of before, David Anderson and Francine Graham, stormed their way into a kosher supermarket in Jersey City, New Jersey, guns blazing, and killed 4 people. Police later found a bomb in the assailant's car intended to blow up a synagogue in a nearby town. And that same month, on the 7th night of the holiday of Hanukkah, 2019, still another previously unknown fellow, Grafton Thomas, entered a rabbi's home in Monsey, New York, where the holiday was being celebrated, and stabbed and slashed 5 people with a machete. One of them, an elderly rabbi, lay unconscious in the hospital for several months before dying of his wounds. It's not possible to generalize about the motives of all of these people, for they are hardly all alike. Bowers and Earnest are radical white supremacists. Anderson and Graham subscribe to an extreme version of Black Hebrew Israelite ideology, and Grafton Thomas identified as a Muslim, but in his journals, he also sympathized with the Black Hebrew Israelite denunciation of Jews as imposters. What they have in common, though, is clear. They all hate Jews, hold them responsible for most of the world's problems, refer to Jews as Nazis and the children of Satan, and have no inhibitions whatsoever to killing as many of them as they can. Let me tell you a bit more about some of these people and also situate their crimes within the broader contexts of today's anti-Semitism in the United States. Robert Bowers is a 46-year-old man with no previous criminal record. Apart from a 2015 traffic violation in his name, there was nothing at all in his past that was a legal infraction, let alone that might have indicated he was about to become a mass murderer. He lived by himself in a modest rented apartment in Pittsburgh, and he worked as a truck driver. Apart from being a loner, there are two additional salient facts to know about him. One, he had 21 guns registered in his name, 4 of which he took with him into the Tree of Life synagogue on the morning of October 27th. And 2, he evidently spent a lot of his time on social media, in particular on an extremist website called Gab, G-A-B, favored by people on the far right, including white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and anti-Semites. Postings he would have found on Gab, and also some that he himself contributed, portrayed Jews as being the enemy of white people and claim that Jews are actively at war against white people. In some of his postings, Bowers seemed especially worked up over immigrants and refugees, whom he labeled invaders and saw as a threat to America's majority white population. Closely allied with these invaders, as he called them, were the Jews, whom he referred to in his personal biographical note as the children of Satan. Seen as an evil people, they were helping the invaders invade, in his mind. In one of his postings, he writes, and I quote him, "It's the filthy, evil Jews bringing the filthy, evil Muslims into the country. Stop the kikes," a slur on Jews, he added, "and then worry about the Muslims." Bowers seemed particularly agitated by the work of HIAS, H-I-A-S, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, originally established in 1881 to aid Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe. In more recent years, HIAS has widened its scope to assist in the resettlement of a range of other people. In the work of this relatively small agency, Bowers saw the wicked hand of the Jews, and he decided to cut it off. His very last posting on Gab reads as follows, I quote him, "HIAS likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. I'm going in." With slaughter uppermost in his mind, in he went, entering the lobby of the Tree of Life synagogue shortly before 10 a.m. that Sabbath morning. Calling out, "All Jews must die," he proceeded to gun down a group of elderly Jewish worshipers who, in his delusional view of them, were somehow a threat to white people, his people. Apprehended by policemen who had rushed to the scene, Bowers told one of the arresting officers, these are his words, They're committing genocide against my people. I just want to kill Jews. News of his bloody crime came as a shock to most people in this country, but not to all. John Earnest credited Bowers for inspiring him to kill Jews in the Poway Synagogue in California. Until he carried out his deadly shooting, Earnest would have seemed an unlikely person to plan such a crime. He was all of 19 years old. He comes from a stable family. His father is a science teacher. He's been himself a nursing student. He claims to have great friends, and he's played piano seriously for many years. He also regularly attended his parents' Orthodox Presbyterian church. For 18 months prior to the shooting in Poway, however, he led an active life on the internet, and he was an avid poster on something called 8chan's Powboard, the gathering site for white nationalists, white supremacists, anti-Semites, and neo-Nazis. Evidently, Earnest was radicalized through Powboard, and he posted a 4,300-word open letter or manifesto just before the Poway Synagogue shootings. Among other things, when reading this manifesto, one learns that Earnest saw himself as a martyr prepared to sacrifice himself on behalf of his race and in defense of Christianity. Those are his words. White Christians, he was convinced, were under attack by Jews, whom he charged with responsibility for the death of Jesus and early Christian saints. Addressing himself to my brothers in Christ, he claimed Jews, and these are his words, were inspired by demons and Satan and will attempt to corrupt your soul with sin and perversion. In addition, he went on, Jews fund politicians and organizations who use mass immigration to displace the European race. An ardent white supremacist, he's sure, and I quote him again, that there are brave white men alive who have the willpower and courage it takes to say, fuck my life, excuse the vulgarism, that's his term, not mine. I'm willing to sacrifice everything for the benefit of my race. In this spirit, he writes that he's personally prepared to sacrifice my future for the sake of my people, our people. I would die 1,000 times over to prevent the doomed fate that the Jews have planned for my race. As these and similar sentiments reveal, his thinking combines traditional Christian anti-Semitism and contemporary white nationalism. This hybrid of two deeply hostile anti-Jewish ideologies is now a familiar presence on the American far right, where Nazi flags sometimes mingle with large handheld crucifixes in angry street demonstrations. Both were on display at a Holocaust Remembrance Day event in May 2019 in a small Arkansas town, when white supremacist protesters carrying Nazi flags, crosses, and pictures of Jesus and signs saying the Holocaust never happened, but it should have, interrupted the Holocaust Remembrance event. Such activities are fed by several sources, including a small but passionate Christian identity movement that dates back to the 19th century and today is undergoing something of a revival on the populist and nativist right in America, where it combines white aspirations for racial purity with a return of familiar medieval Christian accusations against Jews. Both Robert Bowers and John Earnest were motivated by such thinking, which is abundantly available on the internet sites they frequented, and that almost certainly is having an influence on others. Like Bowers and Earnest, many who frequent these websites are obsessed with the delusional notion that Jews are an evil, threatening, conspiratorial race. These people are angry and they're armed. For instance, one day after the Pittsburgh Killings, a 30-year-old white nationalist named Jeffrey Clark, who had participated in the notorious Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2017, wrote on Gab, and again, I apologize for the vulgarism, it's his, not mine. He wrote on Gab that the fucking kikes that got shot by the hero Robert Bowers were all active supporters of pedophilia, and every last Jew deserved exactly what happened to them, and so much worse. He also wrote that the synagogue shootings were merely, in his words, a dry run for things to come. Fortunately, in this instance, family members who knew that Clark owned a gun and a high-capacity magazine and were worried about what he might do, turned him into police. There have been others as well. A 21-year-old recent convert to Islam named Damon Joseph, himself an aspiring jihadist, was arrested on December the 7th, 2018, for planning to attack a synagogue in Toledo, Ohio, on behalf of ISIS. When arrested by undercover FBI agents, he boasted that he admired what Robert Bowers had done and was inspired by the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter. I quote him, "I can see myself carrying out this type of operation," he told the FBI. If you ask what motivated him, his reply is this: Jewish people are evil and deserve what's coming to them, he declared. And just before being arrested, he had acquired 2 assault rifles and said he wanted to kill a rabbi. Just 2 days after the synagogue shootings in Poway, California, federal authorities in Los Angeles arrested a fellow named Mark Stephen Domingo, another recent convert to Islam, who had been planning a terrorist attack against synagogues, as well as against churches and military bases. Those I've just described to you are not alone. In May 2019, there were attempted attacks against 2 synagogues in Boston and 1 in Chicago. There were also attacks against synagogues in Miami, Florida, Los Angeles, California, Pueblo, Colorado, Duluth, Minnesota, Richmond, Virginia, and other American cities. In the summer and fall of 2020, synagogues in Berkeley, California, Portland, Oregon, and Wilmington, Delaware were the target of arson attacks. In July 2019, an elderly Jew was shot outside his synagogue in North Miami Beach. In October of 2019, two men leaving their synagogue in Sunny Isles Beach, Florida, were threatened by a knife-wielding man who screamed anti-Semitic slurs at them. When arrested, the assailant told police he was, and I quote him, a Black Israelite and real Jew, not like these fake Jews who are here stealing money from us. They should go back to Israel. While underreported, physical assaults on religious Jews in parts of Brooklyn and elsewhere have become common occurrences. The same is true of the placement of swastikas and other anti-Semitic graffiti on synagogues, Jewish homes, schools, and cemeteries, today an all too common practice. What can we learn from these incidents about what's happening today in our own country and about what may lie ahead? Anti-Semitism does not exist in isolation, but it arises and flourishes within a general climate of social unrest and sharply divided antagonistic political differences. In addition, when economies go down, anti-Semitism tends to go up. Among parts of the population, thinking then may take conspiratorial turns and look around for whom to blame for the economic pain, social disorder, and political turmoil they see all around them. Jews have long been scapegoated as the cause of such troubles, and they are being so once again in our own country. As evidence, learn what you can, if you can stomach it, about QAnon, and consider other social media sites of the kind I've referred to earlier, and many others like them, and you will find Jews singled out as the cause for everything from the coronavirus pandemic to the electoral defeat of President Trump. In fact, the mob that recently invaded the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. just last month included white supremacists, hardcore neo-Nazis, and anti-Semites, some of whom insist that President Trump has been the target of what they call a Jew coup, allegedly financed by the Hungarian Jewish immigrant and financier George Soros and members of the Rothschild family. Nazi symbols were visible among people in that mob, as were people wearing T-shirts and hoodies that read Camp Auschwitz and Work Brings Freedom, a translation of the German Arbeit macht frei sign at Auschwitz. Not so long ago, such slogans would have brought disgrace to anyone foolish enough to display them. Now some wear them with pride. Until recently, it's been commonly believed that America is different from other countries for being largely free of ongoing serious anti-Jewish hostility. In fact, though, American history has hardly been free of anti-Semitism. Social anti-Semitism is part of our country's history, and in earlier decades, American Jews experienced varying degrees of discrimination and exclusion in employment, residential neighborhoods, universities, resorts, social clubs, and even hospitals. A hard-edged anti-Semitism, at its most extreme reflecting Nazi views, was at times a prominent part of the public discourse in this country in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And during these years, Jews were frequently accused of disloyalty, economic profiteering, and warmongering. Acts of aggression against individual Jews and Jewish institutions have also occurred over the years, and especially during the early years of the civil rights movement, there were multiple bombings of Jewish synagogues and schools, particularly in southern states. Few Jews of the present generation know very much about these past incidents, however, and while they may be aware of anti-Semitic attacks occurring in European countries, they did not expect to see such violence occurring on American soil. It now is occurring here, and there are reasons to fear it may get worse. America is in an overwrought phase, as we all know, of social, political, and ideological tumult in which anger and extreme views of many kinds have come prominently to the fore. The Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City, and Muncie assaults that I just told you about are horrific examples of the kind of hatred that can surface in such a time. To what degree anti-Semitism will escalate still further in the United States is unpredictable, but anti-Jewish hostility has already reached worrisome levels, and it bears watching. I'll close on this note. Jews in this country are right now seeking to find ways to cope with the problems I've put before you. Their chances for success will go up if all of us acknowledge that hate is too big a burden to bear alone and join them in actively opposing hatred in all of its forms. As the writer Elie Wiesel has taught us, and I quote him, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. If we are summoned to choose life, and we are, to do nothing in the face of the threats before us is just not a viable option. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld, for your important and sobering words for us tonight. I invite everyone now to a brief time of dialogue. And so those who are attending this webinar tonight can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen for that. And while the questions are rolling in, I am going to begin first with Dr. Sharon Betzworth, Professor of Religion and Director of the Wimberley School of Religion here at Oklahoma City University, and Rabbi Vered Harris of Temple B'nai Israel here in Oklahoma City to bring their questions first for Dr. Rosenfeld.
Thank you, Dr. Wolf, for that introduction, and thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld, for that talk, most serious and sobering. Since Oklahoma City University is primarily a community of undergraduate students, of young adults, I would wonder what you would say to our students is the most effective means for them to combat anti-Semitism. What are some of the ways that they can combat these evils that are wracking the country right now?
Yes. Remain decent, be a reasonable, honest, good person. If in fact you come across words of hate directed at Jews or anyone else for that matter. Don't be indifferent. Speak up. Oppose those things. We're living at a difficult moment in our country's history for all kinds of reasons, as we know, but what we badly need is for tempers to cool down, for a kind of reasonable calmness to be part of our daily lives. It's my own sense that most Americans are decent people, and I've been teaching for many years, and I'd certainly say that about my students. On the other hand, a great deal of life these days is led virtually on the internet. And there are some really extreme sites. I mentioned a couple of them, but there are many more. The single biggest disseminator of hate speech today against all kinds of people are these extremist websites. So one thing I would tell students is avoid them. Read a good book instead and stay away from anything of that sort. It's just full of trouble. It makes people kooky, and then they become, or at least can become, tempted to enter a kind of conspiratorial thinking that only ends up bad.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening. One of the stories that you were telling, vignettes that you were going back over, when you were talking about the about Bowers and the Tree of Life and Jews as the enemy of white people. This whole classification of Jews as white people, where I was wondering if you can say a little bit about that. What kinds of classifications would you use for Jewish people today? Some of us might check that box that's white. Others of us, it doesn't apply to us at all. Where's that? How does that work? That idea of Jews being both the enemy of white people, that white nationalists might see it that way, and yet within the Jewish community, there's a lot of discord about who's white and who's not.
Right. I myself don't like racial thinking of any kind. There are people these days, I'm not one of them, who endorse the notion that either you're a racist or an anti-racist. That's simplistic, and it's a formula that I think just won't stand up to clear thinking. And yet, Rabbi Harris, you're absolutely right. Jews are, I would say, dismissed and denigrated as being white and privileged. This is owing to critical race theory, a new ideological form of pedagogy that's now, in fact, deeply invested in a number of universities. I oppose it myself strongly. America has a long and shameful racial history. There's no doubt about it. I'm aware of Oklahoma's history to some degree in this regard. The more we know about it, the more we own up to it, the more we take steps to do whatever we can to see that stuff like that is never repeated. We should do, but in doing it, we're not doing it as whites or non-whites or privileged or non-privileged. I don't think of myself in those terms at all. And I think it's damaging, frankly, for people to be trapped within racial categories. So I'm a strong opponent. Many are not, I agree. And many within the Jewish community buy into that. I think they're misguided.
All right, I'm going to choose a few of these questions. We certainly have more than you could possibly answer in the time we have remaining tonight. But the first one I'll start with, and it is by Catherine Cooper, who asks, what are some of the ways that QAnon invokes anti-Semitic accusations and stereotypes?
Yeah, and QAnon is hard to peg in a way because it's very large and very diffuse. but it holds to notions of Satan worship and pedophilia, and Jews are often mentioned as agents, as the Antichrist, as agents of Satan, and as engaging in pedophilia as well. So that's one of the ways in which it shows up.
So a similar question to follow on that one from Jim Borman: how do we even begin to combat the 21st century brand of anti-Semitism as reflected by QAnon Proud Boys, not to mention politicians who lend them support?
Right, a necessary question and a hard one to answer. All of us in America endorse the First Amendment. We believe in free speech. On the other hand, there is such a thing as hate speech, which ends up causing no end of trouble. There's a lot of debate these days about whether the internet should be regulated or unregulated. By and large, it's been a very open source for the good and also for the bad. So one area for sure, since, as I said before, the largest single disseminator of hatred in America is the internet. One serious issue that needs looking at in order to put restraints on open hatred is the question of regulation. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, would you advocate the acceptance of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as the US definition? You mentioned that organization earlier.
No, it was actually a different organization.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has been adopted already a few years ago by our country's State Department. To that degree, it's official. It's not a legislative code. It's also been adopted now by more than 24 countries, in addition to ours. A number of universities and other agencies and institutions, not as a legislative code, but as a guide to defining anti-Semitism. It gives examples of anti-Semitism. In my third lecture, a couple days from now, I'll be talking about the connections between what's called Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and I'll speak more about IHRA in that lecture.
The next question, and hopefully you'll mention some of your work here, what's the best place, maybe the best bibliography for learning more on this topic?
Right. The institute that I direct at Indiana University, it's called the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, is one of only 2 university-based institutes in the whole country that takes an ongoing look from a research level as well as teaching level at anti-Semitism. The other university is Yale. Our website is available. I'm sure you could put it in the chat and make it available to people. We do a great deal. Among other things, we're doing a series of webinars on contemporary anti-Semitism. We've done 13 of them in recent months. We have 8 more planned. One will be offered as early as this coming Sunday, dealing with conspiracy thinking and anti-Semitism and tracing the origins of much of contemporary conspiracy thinking back to medieval sources. So that's certainly something to look at. Indiana University Press has published a number of books on anti-Semitism in a series called Studies in Anti-Semitism. There's also a major academic scholarly journal called Anti-Semitism Studies. And for more, just have people drop me an email and I'll be glad to pass on more information.
That's great, thank you. And as you spoke and gave us so many helpful points of information, it reminded me to mention that everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a follow-up email with a website where the videos of the lectures will be available. The next question I'm going to read is an important one as well. I have a question regarding what it takes for those individuals that seek to spread the hateful and untrue facts to take that to the next step into seeking to do physical violence and obscenity. So what's that step between posting and thoughts to the shootings and murders? Can you speak to that a bit?
Right. Before anti-Semitism becomes an idea or an ideology, it's a passion. People feel hatred against Jews. They fear Jews. They feel contempt for Jews. They resent Jews. They distrust Jews, etc., etc. All of this is really about imaginary Jews. Many such people have never met a Jew in their life. They know next to nothing about Jewish history and Judaism, but they have delusional notions in their heads about Jews as the Antichrist or Jews as somehow agents of Satan, linked to evil, and they feel compelled, unfortunately, in an age like ours, in which restraints have just sort of been blown away, often to act. As I mentioned before, this Pittsburgh, Jews have lived in America, depending on when one, for a long, long time. But the Pittsburgh Killings were the worst assault against Jews in American history. It happened just the day before yesterday, so to speak, and it's been followed by these other events. So unless these passions are checked, it's very hard to deal with. Anti-Semites of this kind tend to be fact resistant. So we can tell them no end of things. Will it change their minds and hearts? It's still worth trying, but I'm not convinced that we can reach them in that way.
The next question is about the term Black Israelite that you mentioned. Could you explain that a little bit for everyone, please?
Yes. Needless to say, most African Americans don't subscribe to this religion, but there is a religion in this country called Black Israelite religion. People who are adherents of it claim to be the real Jews and claim that other Jews, the people who attend Rabbi Vered's synagogue, are fake Jews or imposter Jews. And they get very angry when they come to recognize real Jews whom they regard to be posing, fakes. And they can, not day in and day out, but as I've already exhibited, they can become very aggressive and assault Jews. Now, from the little I know, because I'm still learning myself about this offshoot religion, from the little I know, many Black Israelites are not aggressive and hateful like this, but there is a segment that are. They're usually found on street corners shouting at people. They do a lot of missionary work out on the streets, and they can turn very nasty against Jews coming out of synagogues and things like that. They believe these Jews are not the real thing, they are.
Thank you. The next question, I think you will be addressing this later this week, but maybe you could give us a teaser. How do you interpret the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel by the US, and is the acceptance of this or lack thereof an indication of anti-Semitism?
Right. Personally, I'm all for it. Jerusalem has always been the capital of Israel. And the recognition of it by President Trump, I think, was long overdue and a good thing. It's in line with reality. The government sits in Jerusalem, the Supreme Court sits in Jerusalem, and on and on. I don't see why it's taken this long, in fact, for the country's capital to be recognized as its capital. So it's a fact of life, now acknowledged, and I can only think it's beneficial. If someone denies it, is the person an anti-Semite? No, I wouldn't say they're an anti-Semite, but they're just not being realistic. Just as Washington, D.C. is our country's capital, Jerusalem long has been Israel's capital, will always remain Israel's capital, and it's a fact of life.
I want to acknowledge that we're at the end of our allotted time, which does not mean that we all have to finish, but I at least want to put some thanks out there, and thank you, Dr. Rosenfeld, for being our speaker this evening and for an excellent presentation. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Sharon Betzworth, Rabbi Vered Harris. I also want to thank Dr. Paul Gebb from our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning for helping us with the technology, and for Sarah Kelly, who managed hundreds of email RSVPs. So thanks to everyone who supported this evening. And if you would like to stay for a few more minutes, I will try to get through a couple more questions in any case. Thank you.
I'm open to it if you and others are. I don't promise to cheer anybody up with this presentation. It's just not built into it. But there's nothing like knowing the real world that we live in, and anti-Semitism, unfortunately, together with other very potent hatreds, is now part of our reality.
I'm trying to summarize here with a number of questions, and you've talked at some length about extremists on the far right. There have been several questions asking about anti-Semitism from the far left. Can you say something about that, please?
Yes, I can, and I'll certainly say more about it when we get to our third lecture on anti-Zionism and its connections to anti-Semitism. There are people on the left, the far left, most especially, but also on the so-called progressive left, who are fervently opposed to the existence of the State of Israel. Not a particular policy of the State of Israel, but the fact of Jewish national existence, Jewish peoplehood as such, sets them off. It's as if Israel, by right of being, is a provocation somehow. Well, the fact of the matter is, Israel is a strong, independent, democratic state, founded in 1948, recognized by most of the world's countries as legitimate. Does it have its share of problems? All countries do. Could it be better still? No doubt, just as America could be better still. But personally, I thank God for its existence. And I'm a strong opponent of anyone who argues against its right to a future. And those arguments come from the left. People who look to delegitimize the Jewish state and basically see it dissolved. That's the form that left-wing anti-Semitism takes. It's against the Jewish state, and all of us who are supporters of the Jewish state as well. And it can become very fervent. And I said before, anti-Semitism is a passion before it becomes an idea. And some of the passions that become evident when put on display by people on the left are in fact anti-Semitic.
Thank you. I'll bring two more questions. One was fairly specific. and related to seeking resources, a student who's working on research about Muslim anti-Semitic incidents who wondered your source about Grafton Thomas identifying as Muslim.
That source was New York Times, simply that, yeah. If he were to Google Grafton Thomas, he would find that. Others also wrote about it. But if he's really interested in Muslim anti-Semitism, there are some good sources going well beyond Grafton Thomas. Again, I'll say some things on in my third lecture about that, because a couple of things are going on at the same time within Islam. There is a long-standing strain of animosity. At the same time, right now, we're living in ways that are hopeful in certain respects, and I'll point those out in my talk.
Good, thank you. And the question I'll ask you to end with then has to do with politicians and the ways that they might become involved in reducing anti-Semitism or responding to it when it comes up in their realm. Right.
So the question always arises, and it's a necessary question. What I wanted to do tonight, and I realize I won't apologize for it because I've been asked to invited to speak about anti-Semitism. It's not a cheerful subject, but I study it day and night and know a good deal about it, and most people don't. So I wanted to help open eyes to how bad can become. It can become pretty bad. There's no doubt about it. The next question is, good, now that you've established that, what can we do about it? And basically it gets down to 3 or 4 things. One is legislation. Make sure that we have good laws on the books that are workable, that will help to counter and combat such hatred. Another is not legislative, but educational. It falls, Dr. Wolf, to you and to me and our colleagues at your university, my university, and universities and schools all over the place to teach well and to teach against hatred of all kinds. The hatred specifically that I focused on tonight, of course, was Jew hatred, but I certainly acknowledged and am a strong advocate of doing all we can to dampen down hatreds against Blacks, against Muslims, against gays, you name it. All of that stuff can cause problems. And the third is leadership. There's nothing like good leadership across the board, at the political level, at the level of civic society, at the cultural level, and so on. We need the best leaders we can get to speak out forthrightly for things that we all want to see promoted and against things that we know cause harm. So that's the best answer I can give right now.
And that's a great closing comment. So thank you again for being with us. And I will remind everyone that if you registered for this webinar, you will later receive a link to where you can find the recordings on our website at Oklahoma City University. I did post in the chat the discount code for Dr. Rosenfeld's books at Indiana University Press. I thank again our panelists and our support team, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow afternoon at 2:30 Central Time. So you do have to adjust for your time zone, please. And we look forward to being together again then. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wolf. A pleasure being with you all.